to be talking about the church in the commons. Looking at the intersection of church, business, and neighborhood, we see that culture is changing and the church must change as well. So for many years, the central model of church planting in America has been to start a worship service. We're really excited about today's conversation because Anton, Fero, and Cory Doiron are located in Portland, Oregon, and they've been piloting a different way. So we're excited to hear from them about their journeys in church planting and to explore how it has led them to launch marketplace businesses rather than public worship gatherings. So we're going to talk about and hear why you may want to consider starting a business as the first step in church planting. And our time is going to be full of really valuable dialogue about the role of business entrepreneurship within the landscape of the neighborhood and church planting. So we're really glad that you are here with us today. So if you're just joining, we want to invite you to put your name and where you're joining from into the chat. And would like to let you know that today's webinar is actually sponsored by the Marketplace Learning Cohort, the Marketplace Planting Cohort. The V3 movement is a church planting movement, and we have different cohorts, and the one that is sponsoring today's webinar is one that's focused on marketplace planting. And so we want to encourage you to come and join that. It's a 8 to 9 month process of digging deep into what are the core elements of missional movemental planting within the context of marketplace. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our amazing guests for today. They're going to drop some serious knowledge, and so we're really excited to have them. This webinar, just to give a quick overview, we're going to be talking about how starting a business can embed you in an ecosystem of a local place, and how launching a marketplace work can lead to more sustainable church in the future, how cultivating a business can be a vehicle of liberation for its neighbors, and how building a business can help church planters last in post-Christian cities. Creating community in and around your business can provide hospitable spaces for neighborhood convergence. And so to lead us in today's conversation, we've got Cory Doiron, who is a hockey coach, a pastor, and the owner of PEP Co-working Shop in North Portland. He and his wife, who's also named Cory, moved to Portland a little over 5 years ago to initiate a faith community that's now called Church for Neighbors. And this adventure has led them into foster parenting several times over, officially and unofficially, and helping to start a couple of businesses and multiplying neighborhood home-based churches. So Cory is a Canadian transplant, and he plays a mean guitar, and when he's not doing that and all of these other amazing things, he's chasing his small children around the yard. Then we have Anton, Fero. His partner, Courtney, and his 2 kids moved to Portland almost 5 years ago to try something different. They wanted to build a faith community where they were intrigued with building a business but were intrigued with building a business at the same time. So that's what they did. They started a house church called The Commonplace and started a gym in their garage called CrossFit Blue House. Blue House has gone from the garage to a multi-million-dollar facility in 5 years and has been the central place of hospitality of Commonplace. And so Anton believes that the future of church needs businesses to thrive, that they may be more connected than we think. Also with us, we've got J.R. Woodward, who has been passionately planting churches on the East and West Coast for over 25 years. He's the author of Creating a Missional Culture, co-author of the Church's Movement. He co-founded Missio Alliance. He's a national director for the V3 movement, has done many, many different things. And I'm Ruffin. I am the V3 operations person, also the founder of the COO team, which is a virtual operations agency that works with nonprofits and small businesses. So this is a topic that really resonates deeply with me. So with that, we're going to hear from Cory and Anton. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions questions. So if you want to look in the Zoom navigation, feel free to drop any of your questions there. And as we get further along in our time today, there'll be an opportunity for them to answer and respond to any of the questions and comments that you have. So with that, I give you Cory and Anton.
Hello, friends. Hope you're doing well. Excited to hang here today with y'all. And yeah, so I think maybe Anton, I'll get us rolling here, and then we can riff back and forth on some of the stuff that you and I talk about a lot recently. And so yeah, so 5 years ago, as mentioned, a little over 5 years actually for us, we moved to Portland, Oregon, to initiate a faith community here. And Portland has this long rap of being the place where church planters go to no longer be church planters. And 3 to 5 years is the cycle that historically we see here. And even in my time here, I've seen many come and go. And for me, I'm deeply interested in kind of the future of the church. And Portland was a place to kind of like a playground to try and navigate that and figure that out. And we're throwing up a building and starting a church service and having a great kids ministry and the awesome parking lot people. Like, this is just not a possibility in Portland, and been tried many times over and failed. And so that just led to this opportunity for innovation. I think off the top, I want to say that I didn't come to Portland with a bunch of business experience. I had never started businesses before, but in our time here, we've been able to start a small landscaping company, eco-friendly landscaping company that employs at-risk youth in our neighborhood. We started kind of relaunched a co-working shop in our neighborhood. And then in the midst of all that, my wife is a hairstylist, and so we've been, starting a business with her as well, doing working in a salon and working in the wedding industry. And so we've learned a lot in the last 5 years, and the value that business can bring. So how about you, Anton? You want to kind of give a little bit of your lead up, and we can go from there?
Yeah, so I have a similar story to Cory in that when I came to Portland, we knew we wanted to start a business, but the business was still very much for the sake of ministry, I guess is probably the best way to put it. And I think one thing that's been really interesting is, our business over 5 years, the gym has grown quite a lot. And just like Cory, I didn't have a ton of experience starting business before I came here. It was more of an experiment. And I think my biggest takeaway over 5 years is that the business isn't just a means to an end, like I thought it was. It's actually a vital piece to an ecosystem of building something that actually helps a whole neighborhood. And so I think I've gone from this place of like, oh, I'll do this thing so that I can meet people and I can see if they'll come to church, into, oh, actually, if this gym just becomes just a great business that's bringing good to the neighborhood, it actually, that in of itself might be worth something. And it might actually be an expression of a faith community that, yeah, we really, as evangelical, some of us that maybe are evangelicals or come from that background haven't really tapped into yet. And so now here we are 5 years later, just bought $1 million facility. Jim pays us like a very good salary. And we don't take anything from our faith community, which that in of itself has really eased the stress from, when we first moved here to start a church, and we're more, we're getting paid by support. So that's kind of my story. That's where we're at.
Yeah. Anton, why don't you share a little bit? I mean, I've had the privilege of, so for those who you probably don't know, Anton and I live about 10 minutes away. So we're both in Portland. Anton's about like 2 neighborhoods towards the ocean from me. And I've been able to have a front row seat of watching your CrossFit gym go from your garage to like a neighborhood space that you were renting, and now was able to walk your new facility with you as you're getting it ready to go, and watch the growth. But but also like watch the influence. I mean, I see these little Blue House stickers and Blue House shirts all over our area town. And so like, I feel like you all have been like, you're now a part of like the ecosystem or the fabric of your neighborhood and your area. Maybe you could share a little bit about kind of what that process has been like and what you've seen there, because I think you guys have done such a good job, or had such an opportunity to be a part of the fabric of your neighborhood.
Yeah, I think I do think the business has expedited the process of us being welcomed into the neighborhood. You know, I mean, I think all of us wish that was the case with our churches, but there's a lot of baggage there and there's a lot of hurdles that you have to overcome. So I think what we've found is, you know, at first, to be really frank, even starting a business as a white guy in a neighborhood that is traditionally more poor, we did actually get a little bit of pushback even at first, you know, even with our business. You could, I mean, I can only imagine what people are saying about another transplant church to the neighborhood we're in. But as we started, you know, really bringing something to the neighborhood that was good, that narrative really started to change. And I think the gym has just given us the ability to give more than we take. I think a lot of times we come into spaces and we just kind of are asking a lot from people. And I think the gym has given us an ability to serve a little bit more people. So yeah, I think that's been a big piece for me.
Yeah, that's cool. It's something that when we came to Portland, something we talked a lot about with our early group is that we wanted to be neighbors before we were a church, and felt like that was really important in developing relationships and being received by the neighborhood. I mean, at the same time, I mean, we were in year 2 and another church plant started in town, and they literally got protested out of the neighborhood they were in, which was just like, you know, again, 10 minutes over from us. And they were like launching with a service and all those things. And I remember kind of watching that and circling back up with our team and just talking about the importance of, you know, being received by our neighborhood. And I've found, you know, like what's been really cool for us, you know, as we've started these businesses and we've existed, you know, a neighborhood has lots of facets to it, right? So you've got kind of like your educational facet or your social facet, and there's all these flows, but there's this business kind of thread that exists in neighborhoods, this economic thread, and being able to enter that, but not as a church, like not as, especially in Portland, an entity that maybe is known for, whether right or wrong, an entity that is known for like taking from places rather than giving to places, and being able to start businesses that invest in a place. So our first business we started, when we started the lawn care company, and the lawn care company out of the gate was eco-friendly, right? So like this was like a value. Everything we were using was electric. But then we were employing at-risk and refugee youth right out of the gate. And so people were like, wait a second. So like you're starting this business and you're investing in the future of our neighborhood and you're working with the youth. And it was just like subtle, you know, and it was, and now, you know, like just the other day, I'm picking up my kid at her preschool, and one of the other preschool parents comes up and is like, oh, do you know Josh? We're like, yeah, I know Josh. We're like, yeah, Josh's company is doing our lawn now. And I was like, oh, really cool. And the preschool school was like, oh yeah, they're doing our lawn too. So anyway, the company's called My Good Neighbor, if you want to Google it quick and look it up, but My Good Neighbor PDX, I think it is. But anyway, so it just kind of like put us on a layer of the ecosystem that begins to kind of open up conversations and allow our neighbors to get to know members of our faith community in a way that is not like being controlled by the faith community. So, you know, meeting people, you know, when you show up to a church service in a lobby, you know, that's fine, but it's like this controlled setting. But being able to, people are meeting members of our community like on their front lawn because they're having their lawn mowed by someone in our community. You know, the same way our neighborhood has seen a run of violence here in the last 6 months. But because of the co-working space, I'm on the neighborhood business association. And so, you know, now I'm in the business association. We're having really robust conversations about how do we care for our neighbors, and how do we care for these businesses, and how do we do this in a way that is equitable, and like the conversations are really incredible. And if we were just like another transplant church plant in town, I wouldn't be in these meetings. I wouldn't be able to participate in these conversations. So yeah, so I think, business like nothing I've seen before has kind of gotten us into, I think Anton, you was like, it got us in there, it expedited the process of participating in the layers of conversation in the neighborhood in a really, really cool way. I think Anton, you touched on it here, but I think the question the church planners are always asking is money. So like maybe we could just talk a little bit about how that kind of financially has helped, because the traditional model is you raise a bunch of money before you start, and then you try to get to like a tithe model within 3 to 5 years, and if you don't get there, then you kind of just call it quits. So maybe talk a little bit, Anton, about how that process has worked for y'all, and why that's been good, because I think you guys have done such a good job there too as well.
Well, it's interesting. Once we told, we're a part of a few networks, a few denominations, definitely tried to bring as many people along as I could when we started. And I thought what was interesting was, because I was not coming up here to do a traditional model, I actually did not get as much funding as I thought. Like a lot of people were like, that sounds really cool, but I don't know how to help you. Or that sounds really great, but our committee won't fund that. So I thought that was really interesting at first, so I was like, well, screw it, I'll just figure it out. And even over the first few years, had lots of churches, lots of different groups come and see what we were doing, and still didn't know how to help because it seemed so foreign. But I remember even back then, we were already having the conversation of nobody's getting paid and from the church with church money, and no, we're not going to pay for a building. So if we have a public gathering, it's going to be because we know somebody, or maybe our gym grows and we can use that. So just trying to have a lightweight model. And so to give you context, like before COVID, young church, right? I'm 35 now. I'm the oldest person around for sure. I'm the oldest person. Which is funny. But so, a lot of people in their 20s don't have any money anyway, especially more so now with such a wealth gap. And we still had about 90,000 maybe coming in a year, which is, I think, great for a young, small community. But when none of that money has to go to the infrastructure, that actually ends up being a lot of money that you can give to your neighbors, or to all of a sudden you're like, dang, this is a lot. And so we worked on, so anyway, so that was just one thing. The business has given us freedom to maximize the money that comes into the faith community. So I think that's just a real simple thing to think about. But I'm not spending all my time going around asking for more funding, because that can turn into a full-time job. I could actually spend all that time just creating a great business in my neighborhood where I'm present every day, and it can just make money. Yeah. So that's been big for us.
Yeah. And I think the reality is that we live in a time when, whether it's like across the board, or these are just the churches or situations that are getting all the press, is the perception of the church is not an entity that has handled money well, right? The amount of financial scandals and big spending. And again, I'm not like, if that's your disposition and feel like this is the church should be spending money on big buildings and all that kind of stuff, that's your call. But the perception of the community towards that doesn't look fondly upon that, right? So especially as we look at cities that are more post-Christian, or I would say Portland is like post-atheist. I don't know, like Christendom is really far away in our city. The idea that we're going to like eventually convince local people to give 10% of their income to a faith community is a long journey, and maybe a mountain that would never get climbed. But also for our neighbors, like we came here. I raised a bunch of money to come here and started with a full-time salary. I came out of like traditional church. I didn't really know anything different. And people would ask me like, well, what do you do? And I'd be like, well, I'm a pastor. And they'd be like, well, but what do you do for work? Right. So like, it was like the distance between like understanding that concept was just really, really wide. So it just became a conversation in the neighborhood and a value in the neighborhood that wasn't what I wanted to battle. Right. And so part of starting businesses for us was rethinking about this financial model, both on a sustainability level financially, but also a sustainability level on our, like how we appear to our neighbors and our witness to our neighbors. And I'd way rather talk about like liberation and freedom that comes in Jesus than the financial structure of our church, right? But in a city like Portland, like people are more interested in what you do with your money before they want to talk about the message that you carry. Because what we do with our money points to our value system. And we're in a culture that if people don't feel like the values are legit, they actually don't care about the rest of it, right? And so I mean, for us, over the last 5 years, like I've taken about a 20% decrease in salary every year. The plan this year is to drop down to 50% and then continue to like move towards where Anton is at. And the businesses that we've started have allowed us to move in that direction and navigate that well. So I think it just brings a sustainability to our church planning ventures, both financial and longevity in a neighborhood. So Anton, why don't we touch on that a little bit? So like moving past the dollars and cents a little bit. I don't know about you, but I think like businesses have shown that that can bring a sense of liberation to neighbors, that actually like these businesses can be a tool of liberation to our neighbors. And some of that is financial, like the amount of money that we're able to give away, the amount of money from our internal community that we can parlay towards helping with things like housing and foster care, and rather than salaries and buildings. But I also feel like, again, I know you've had these conversations because you and I talked so much over the last couple of weeks, especially, but it's felt to me like in places of business that people feel a lot more free to have kind of like table conversations about the things that are going on either in their lives or below the surface. Like I had a conversation just recently with someone in our co-working space. It's like in the process of fostering and maybe adopting her sister's kids, and there's all this family drama, and we were able to have just kind of like a conversation at the the water cooler at the co-working space. Mm-hmm. That in a church, doesn't, the freedom or the space to have that conversation doesn't always happen, because hotel lobby is busy and you got all your kids and you're rushing in and you're rushing out, and there's all these reasons why that's challenging. But being able to have these conversations in a common space. Anton, you do a really good job talking about kind of that common space and creating these spaces of commons, and I think these can be foster cultures of liberation in our communities. Anyway, what are your thoughts there, Anton?
Man, I have a lot of thoughts. Gosh, the first thing that pops in my head, I've done some work this last year with a leader named Don Golden. Some of you might know him, some might not, but he's kind of found himself in this space working with business, and maybe we could even bring him on for one of our calls, through some of the coaching. He asked me something a couple of weeks ago that, I don't know, it's still messing with me, where he just said, I want to ask you this, where can you make the biggest difference in your neighborhood? Is it through your church commonplace, or is it through your business blue house? I'm like, dang, bro, that's too challenging. You can't just throw that at me. But I think the thing is, here's the reason again, if we change our ecclesiology, if we change the way we think about good news, if we change the way we think about liberation and we expand it, the thing is, a business is more entangled in everybody's lives than a once a week experience where it's mostly about consumption. You know, so you just think of like, even if you just step back for a second and just think about what you can do in something that people do every day. People partake in these type of practices and businesses every day. Man, I mean, your ability, I think that's my big takeaway over the last 5 years is like seeing fruit from both things. And I'm not saying give up the other thing. I mean, you have to, there's no protocol or A plus B equals C here, but Blue House has just been able to do a lot of things that a church could never do. And we've been able to help people too from so many diverse backgrounds. It's crazy, you know? And so, and like you said about the commons, you know, the commons are things that are getting taken away with surveillance capitalism and everything. And I think, you know, even as y'all start thinking about business, you know, we've been talking a lot about hospitality being core to maybe businesses that faith communities start. And, you know, hospitality businesses, spaces, you know, businesses that create spaces for people is vital right now. Nobody has anywhere to hang out. Yeah. So I would definitely recommend, you know, potentially building a business that's local in the neighborhood around hospitality. And I think that's a great way forward. That's, if I was going to start another church, that's what I would do.
Yeah. I mean, let's be real too, like coming into this pandemic, I don't know how everyone else here is doing, but like learning social behaviors is like, after being locked up for 2 years, it's like, how do we do this? You know, like, how do we exist among each other, you know, and not to mention like all the kind of like idealized, like we're also polarized now as well. So like being able to create space that people in the neighborhood can come together again and communicate with each other again and see the humanity in one another again, like in the flesh versus just like what people are posting on social media or what, you know, or like what you think about your neighbor or believe about your neighbor, but actually like getting to know your neighbor. Like we will need these spaces. And so we think about the kingdom of God and what, you know, and what the Spirit's going to be doing in our neighborhoods, in our networks post COVID. I think one of those big things is creating these spaces of hospitality. But I don't think we're going to see, I could be wrong, I could be very wrong, but I don't think we're going to see masses of people rushing to church services on Sunday morning. Like, I don't think that's going to be where it's going to happen. I think it's going to be happening in barbershops and in coffee shops and at co-working spaces and in gyms. I talked to someone yesterday who was talking about this dream they have in their neighborhood of building a business for local artists. So it'd be like a place where music lessons would happen for kids and local artists could hang their art, and like painters could hang their art and musicians could do performances. And it'd just be like this convergent space where people are coming in for like different needs they have, some to perform, some to make money, some to teach, some to learn. But neighbors are like crossing over in this space and beginning to communicate with each other once again and see the beauty and value in knowing one another. So these hospitable spaces, I think, are going to be super important and huge gifts. And what an opportunity for us as a church to be able to bring this gifts and leverage our nature and leverage the kingdom, our work in the kingdom through these economic and business, hospitable business structures. So I'm with you, Anton. I think like thinking about like, it's not just starting businesses. It's not just about sustainability, right? If that was the case, like we could all start a bunch of payday loan places, right? Like if the goal is just money, if it's just financing the church, then I don't think that's that. I don't think that's not what we're talking about. It's creating this ecosystem of church that is in the fabric, in the incarnation of a neighborhood, incarnating into a neighborhood through business, and seeing the kingdom come through those spaces. So anything else? I think we could go to JR here for some questions. And Anton, unless you've got anything else you want to jump on there with.
No, let's answer questions.
Let's do it. You're muted there, JR.
Yep, thank you. And we'll have time for your questions after, so feel free to put them in the Q&A because Lori will deliver those right after we have a little bit of time here. But I think we all kind of come with a common understanding that like our first question isn't how to grow a church, but what does it mean to see the kingdom become a greater reality in our neighborhood? And I think you both came with that purpose. I think maybe the first question is, when you guys came to Portland, did you come first to plant a church, and then the idea of business came? And what came first, and then how did that change? And maybe how would you do it differently if you were coming the first time with the lessons that you learned?
Yeah. So I made a little comment earlier, but I definitely came to Portland wanting to do both. Kind of context there that's really interesting is I was in the Middle East actually about 7 years ago, and I was in Capernaum. And one of the things that really like messed me up was it seems like a lot of these oikos communities back in the day had family businesses. And so I remember asking this guide, why do no faith communities have businesses? And he said, I don't know. You should start one. And so that's kind of what started the whole theological framework for that. But I will say this, JR, when I came, it was really just for the business to be a means to an end to the church. And I think now that's really changed. I think the business is way more important than that. And now if I went to a new city, I would just start a business first. And I would actually build a whole community outside of the business. You know, I came with the transplant community, and I could actually speak a lot to the problems with transplant. Gosh, we're not talking about that enough, because now we've seen people over 5 years not love the city we're in, not love what we're doing in the neighborhood. And the thing is, I think the power would actually be to start a business and then let the people in that business become the community that it's supposed to be. So that's what I would do different. Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah.
Cory, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I'm in a very similar boat. I mean, we came in, I had starting a business wasn't even on my radar. We came in and started a church in a home, kind of trying to disciple a small core. But just like Anton, that core group of people were transplants. And I just found, over the first 2 years, I spent the majority of my time trying to help people adapt to a new culture that was not theirs, into a city that they didn't love, and couldn't find a way to learn to love it, and that's a problem, and so
yes.
And so if I could do it again, I mean, I had a decent sized team and raised a bunch of money. If I could do it again, I'm in the same boat. I wouldn't bring a huge team, and actually I'd probably move to a place and not do anything called church until there was a business up and running, and actually do what I said to, at the beginning. I said, let's be neighbors before we were our church, but we just couldn't stop acting like a church because it was so much a part of our culture. And that was it was a cool idea, but hard to live out. Where, if I could do it again, I'd move into a neighborhood, start a business from day one, and actually be a neighbor before we are a church. And let the church come out of that place.
Yeah, I think I had a similar experience. Kind of my first church was in Virginia Tech, and then we moved to LA, brought a number of people with us. And I think what I realized even in LA is that there were some, quote, successful churches that sometimes kind of lived basically whatever culture, wherever they came from, they just created that culture there in a little bubble. And people like to come there just about to prevent them from actually, getting roots in the city. So I appreciate your guys' emphasis there. So if starting a business would be the preferable element, Anton, you talked a little bit about, hospitality local, but how do you discern what business to start in a community? And, a lot of people today, they think about a coffee shop or whatever, but if there's 10 coffee shops in your neighborhood, it feels like it would be more competitive and maybe not looked brightly upon by the neighborhood. So how do you discern what will be truly a blessing to the neighborhood?
Well, this is a tough one, but this is what I would tell people is you've got to start something you actually like to do. I don't even know if CrossFit would have been good news to our neighborhood, but I really liked it. And I was going to do it if nobody showed up. And so that was very helpful in the beginning days because, I mean, people don't know, like the first 6 months was like, we're in the garage. I remember our first opening, like opening party, grand opening, we had 2 people show up. Two. Okay. And it was my neighbors and they both joined because they felt sorry for us. So that just gives you context, but I loved it. And so, and like, to be honest, there is 10 coffee shops in my neighborhood, but if I have a friend that's going to start one because he loves it and it's Filipino inspired. And so I actually would say there's abundance to go around. And if your business is authentic and it's for the common good, it will rise. Like there's 3 gyms in our neighborhood and we're just a neighborhood, but we have grown because we seem to be just more inclusive and accepting and creating space for people in fitness that don't feel comfortable. So that would be my sense is like, what do you love to do? Because you're going to have to do this for the long haul. And the first 2 years are going to suck because it's hard. And so you got to love it. That's my 2 cents.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat. I mean, we started, our first business was this landscaping company, and the guy who started, like, he loves being outside, really passionate about like earth care, and loves working with at-risk and refugee youth. And so as we were discerning, and he's got a ministry degree, he's got a master's in ministry, and he more and more was like, I can't work inside the walls of the church. It's just like who he was and the way the church systems were established didn't fit. And so as we began kind of discerning his vocation, this is what we came up with. And he's killing it. He's like turning clients away. Like he's so busy. And so like and I think what's been really cool, and I think to Anton's point is like, this is what neighbors are seeing, right? Like Josh shows up and you can, like, he's living in his element. He's living out like who God has created him to be. And that puts on display in the neighborhood, like the goodness of God. So just that, and there's so many ways businesses can do this, but just that piece alone, if you have people who are living into their called and created identities, what an incredible, attractive picture. I mean, that's a better evangelistic tool than any amount of like messages in mailboxes, right? Like people are drawn to that and want to know, what, like the why behind the what.
Cool. So, one of the things you guys are both going to be helping to lead a marketplace planting cohort that's actually starting mid-October. So anybody who's kind of listening, that would be good to keep in mind. But Anton, I want to kind of, as it relates to business, and if that's kind of where you're starting, tell me about, like, you talked about, finding it, like you have to be passionate about it. You talked about the start, you had 2. How did it develop? Where is it now? And what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned in kind of building that business?
Well, there's a lot of stages in business, and so, and I think, like, when I say the whole passion word, I think that's just where it's got to start. I think when you get better at being an entrepreneur, I think there is space to critically think about what to start. Like, I'm starting other businesses now, not about necessarily things I'm passionate about, but I see a need, and that's a different thing. But I think when you start, it has to be passion, because it's going to mostly be riding on you. But I think, like, the big thing I've learned, I would say there's stages. And I think people just have to realize, as a founder of something, you're going to have to wear all hats. I just remember, like, the first 18 months of Blue House was me coaching, me like selling, doing everything. And then I think there's a stage where things grow. Like, I remember we transitioned to a new building, and honestly, like, getting out of that first phase is the hardest part. Cause I remember, like, I mean, our story is so crazy. The city shut us down when we were in the garage. They said they're going to take our house if we kept operating in our garage. And so we had like 4 months before winter where we just worked out in parks, and I was like, this is lame. Like, I wouldn't even come to this, and then I finally got cold called a guy that owned this abandoned building, and he signed a letter of intent with me. We never even signed a lease. It was abandoned for 8 years. Halfway through the build out, he disappears. He had a family issue. And so I finished the build out all by myself and, my team, but we spent all the money to do it. And I was like, dude, this guy could totally screw me. But we heard from him a year later. He's like, oh, glad your business worked. And we've been there for 3 years. We've gone from like 30 members in the garage. We went to like 120 in that space. And now we have almost 200 members in 1,000 square foot space. And so we just bought a 6,200 square foot new facility. We have a staff of 12, so it's a different thing now. I only do sales now. That's it. I don't do any coaching really. And so it's a different animal now. So now I pay for a lot of coaching, teaching me how to run a team, and be more of a lead of a team than doing it all. That's the phases. And so I'm still learning a lot. But I will say that the business now feels like robust. It's not going anywhere, and it's now providing like a legit income, which is really exciting. And I just have one other thing. Like, I just want to say this because I think it's important, is like, as we've been more successful in our business, like, it's a good feeling, and we can make a good income from that and not feel so guilty. I think sometimes if you just get paid from the church, I don't know if anybody else felt that, but I would feel, like, can I take that salary? So it's a nice feeling because it's not connected to all that. So that's where we're at right now. So
that's great. Yeah. And I think as you guys have talked about financial sustainability, I do think if we're going to be planting missional churches that actually are trying to connect with the people in the neighborhood that don't know Jesus, the old financial sustainability obviously isn't going to be working. And you have the opportunity to either raise money or you start a business and can be present in the neighborhood. So it's a really, really great idea, I guess. And in the marketplace planting cohort, not only are they going to learn from business and how you've kind of built that, but they're also going to, at some point, a church community is going to form. Cory, like, what does like discipleship and mission and community look like in that space for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we think about the cohort, it's almost it's a bit of a double major, right? It's like thinking about, you're going to start how to start a business and be insanely practical with that. And the reality is you have something that needs to get going. And so, early priority in the cohort is helping get businesses up and running and moving forward. But then there's this other piece of there's still this thing on your heart to plant a church. Anton and I just talked about this literally yesterday. We had lunch and we're talking about the dream of planting a church, and the call to plant a church hasn't left us. So starting a business as a escape from a call is not what we're talking about. It's a part of, it's integrated. And so for us, it's thinking about what does it mean to develop a core of people that can be discipled, and building that core, and then teaching them and discipling them in the way of Jesus to be able to host a larger social space, right? So you're discipling people in this smaller group, and then those people become hosts in the neighborhood. So it's the same. It all becomes intertwined. This idea that we're starting hospitable businesses and we're starting hospitable communities, and the rather than kind of being, I can see my hands in the screen here, but these like two completely separate entities, the principles begin to overlap, right? It's the same concepts in two different spaces and maybe different layers of the neighborhood. And over time, if we're locally rooted and these folks are locally rooted, then our church really it feels super decentralized. It's not this like one church service that we're trying to get, like, it's not a bait and switch to try to get everybody to this thing. but we're discipling people and training people to incarnate and integrate into the neighborhood and have eyes to see what God might be inviting them into, like in the context of the neighborhood. So I don't know if that's helpful, JR. I can be specific.
Yeah, that's
as you
cool.
want,
Like
yeah,
we'll move to the questions that people have since we're kind of
great.
at that time.
Yeah, thanks so much for just all that you have just opened up around your own story. We have a few questions. One, it sounds like the type of business that is started, like it matters. So can you maybe share some other examples that you are aware of that are like hospitality type of businesses other than coffee shops or even gyms?
Yeah, I mean, think about your neighborhood and think about all the spaces that just have a for lease or for rent sign on them right now. I mean, it's half our city, and it's like it's usually businesses that require people to come into it. Okay, so I mean, maybe there's stuff that hasn't been created, but I mean, it's like, yeah, it's salons, barber shops, it's things where it's, if you ever heard of the hospitality industry, like that's what I would think about. It's restaurants, it's ice cream shops. I mean, it's things where people come and get something from you, right? You give them a service. I think the thing that I mean, unless you were doing like maybe like a Tom's model where maybe you made it something and then you had like a give back model, I think that could be interesting. But again, it's not necessarily going to build community. I'm not saying don't do it. There's also, you could also think about service-based work. Like, I'm starting a consultancy where I'll be working with some businesses. And so I think that's another thing where I'm working with people like in the flesh. So I hope that helps, but that's the way I'm thinking about it. I don't want to start something just by sheer capitalism. Like, how can I make this little toy that's on Amazon and I just sell millions of them and I never see that? I don't see how that's good news.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, like businesses that meet people's basic needs. I think, the CrossFit gym, Anton, is cool because it is this convergence space, but you also have like fitness as a need that people have, right? So
Totally.
you're like meeting a need. I talked to someone the other day. I've actually talked to a couple people that are starting business around like fixing bicycles, right? And the amount of people with bicycles is their main method of transportation. And when their bike doesn't work, they can't get to work, so there's, I think there's room to be creative, to kind of do, I mean, to look at your neighborhood and say kind of where are the holes. But I also think, I think what I want to say too here with this is that I think God is putting dreams on people's hearts to start these kinds of businesses. But in the back of your mind, you're thinking like, I could never do that, right? But I think the Spirit will kind of speak to you and give you like an idea or a thought. And I just want to say, like, as someone who had no background in business before doing this, like, you can do it. Like it's not this big scary monster. There's help, and it's possible to start these businesses. So if you have an idea, or you hear of a need, or you hear someone like needs something and you think like, oh, I could do that, there might be a business there, right? There might be a business there that I've never even heard of, that I can't even think about, but because of who you are and your position in the neighborhood, like you've got it.
Thanks. Anything that you would add, Anton?
Well, I mean, I just second that, kind of what I shared before. Just, I mean, be creative, make it around hospitality, not capitalism.
Can we talk about just where to start in terms of looking for funding, grants to start new businesses? The startup cost can be really high, especially if we're talking about a place-based business that's a location. How are ways that we can navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to do your homework. There is a lot of funding around. Oops. Am I there? Am I here?
You're
Okay.
back. You're back.
Okay. If I get cut off again, jump in, Cory. But there's a lot of funding around like low income, minority groups, Like, I know that my friend who's Filipino starting this coffee shop, there's funding around that in the city for BIPOC community. And so I think there's stuff there. I personally did not have, we owned a piece of property that we sold. We used all that money to start the business we had. So we did have a lot of capital up front. I had about 100,000. So yeah, I think the reality is here is there are businesses that require a lot of money to start. There are that don't require as much. And you got to think through that. Like, I think the reality here is like, it's not like, oh, business is easy to start. It's not easy. So I think it is about getting coached. It's about, finding mentors in the space, just like anything else. But then do your homework, because there is a lot of resource for upstarts.
Yeah, and I'll jump in too and say, one of the challenges for me in starting a business is that I have all these like huge ideas, and I want to I want to go big or go home, as the saying goes. And I really had to kind of think about this more as a process. And so the piece that I've been thinking a lot about is like, what do $10,000 startups look like, or $15,000 startups look like? But they're scalable, right? So the co-working space I own is a 9-desk operation. And it was $10,000, $11,000 for me to get started. But it's scalable. Like, so I can just keep adding desks or adding square footage, like Anton started his gym in the garage of his house and just kind of built from there. And so I think there's like, some of this work, it's just scrappy. You just start, and you just start somewhere, and you learn the lessons as you go, and you find people to help along the way, and people that are just kind of a step ahead of you, right? And so if you're looking to start Apple from nothing, good luck. But that's probably not what we're talking about. We're talking about starting these businesses that are hospitable. They're scrappy to start, and you can scale and build over time. And if you want to own a full-on cafe, there's probably some sort of smaller version of that business that you could start tomorrow, just to kind of get started, and start building, learning, and starting to build up some money there. So I mean, there's traditional ways. I mean, there's small business loans and family and friends rounds, and like there's ways. We did fundraisers, and we started the landscaping company, and people were really excited to give to a business that was going to support at-risk youth. So there are things you can do to get some capital, but I would just say, you also just got to find somewhere to start and get moving.
Thanks so much. Would love to know, what advice do you have for helping a pre-existing church embrace doing a business?
You want me to go?
Yes.
I mean, I'll say, I'm never short on advice for things I don't know much about, but like, we didn't come from a pre-existing church. And I think that, but I think you've really got to think about how it fits into your picture of mission. I think the challenge is with pre-existing church is that if your business is a bait and switch, you're going to undermine the credibility of your business, and people will feel that and sniff that out. And that, I think that's really hard to do when you're in a centralized model, where the goal is to get everybody to come to a thing, because then when the business either does that, people won't trust the business, or when the business doesn't do that, the temptation is the church to say that business gets estranged from the church because it's not doing what we want it to do. And so I think, really, I would say, you've got to do some deep internal work of like, why do you want to start a business? Because if you're starting a business for the wrong reasons, it's probably not going to go. If your church is remissioning and really taking it a new direction, then I think there's some potential there. But to getting business started, as an established church, you might have some access to some capital that could really solve that problem. But I would say whoever is starting that business, you really got to release them to be incarnational and not extractional. If the business is there to pull people out of the community into your church service, I don't think that's what we're talking about here, or what Anton and I have any kind of knowledge about.
Yeah, I don't have much to say, but I think these two entities have had trouble coexisting. I think it could be because a lot of churches are businesses, and so you kind of become a threat to the business of church. There I go. It's almost gone again. So that would be my 2 cents. So still figuring out how to integrate that.
Got it. Maybe just, we're almost at time, but would love to hear a reaction. I'm going to smush these 2 questions together. One, we have someone who actually started a thrift store, and they're also launching a coffee shop. They have more missional businesses in their heart, but they feel this tension of Sunday service, you know, from the congregation, you know, that they pastor, but then their heart is really invigorated around that Monday through Saturday expression. How does one hold that tension? And then the other that I'd like to kind of squeeze in is just, how do we deal with privilege, access, and opening space for others? 2 huge questions with 1 minute left on the clock, but you can tackle any of that as best you can.
Well, I will say this really quickly about the person that has the church and then the business. Like, yeah, I feel you on all that tension. Like, that has been our story. We're actually, you know, my big thing is, I would say is, you know, even if we ended up doing some coaching with you, it's like, yeah, let's start thinking about alternative ways to meet with your community. Maybe it's not every Sunday. And, you know, coming to grips with that is challenging because it's been the way it's always been, but you have freedom to do it differently. So roll with that feeling. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, that's a discipleship problem, right? So it's beginning to think about, like, how do I begin to disciple our community and build systems of discipleship that maybe de-emphasize the religious importance of getting to church on Sunday or making it that service, and beginning to disciple people in the way of mission and incarnation in the neighborhood. So that as those changes happen, if that's where you're going, people have been discipled and prepared to walk into those changes with vision and intentionality, rather than it just being like, you know, you're ruining our lives, you know. So I think there's a way forward. JR?
And I know Laura's going to mention this, but like one of the things that you learned in this cohort is that church isn't something that you go to. It's something that we are in that 24/7, but it does kind of, we do have to help disciple, help people reimagine. And to be honest, I think you guys could give testimony, but like, there's not even a funner and better way to be the church when you realize what it could be versus what it is now.
Yeah.
But Lori, and by the way, I did put in 2 links. There's in the chat, there's a link to the V3 movement training, where you can get a little bit of a picture of what the marketplace planting cohort's about, but also the application, because this is starting middle of October. So if you found this interesting, if you found this compelling, what can they do, Lori?
So you can actually click on the link. There's 2 links that I just added again in the chat to find out more about the training. And then also there's a link to the forum. So feel free to touch base on, connect with us there. We would love to explore these ideas with you and help you think through what it looks like to have a marketplace based church plant.
So if you have an interest, definitely apply, because that's the way that we know you have an interest, and then we can work you through your interview process to see if it makes sense. But this is starting really soon, so I really encourage you, if you have interest, go ahead and apply, and then you can interview, talk through what it means, and decide if it makes sense for you. And